Hi, this is Bel Avis. For years at the Conservative Historical website, we have offered a special section called the Conservative History Figures of the Month. What we wanted to do today was take 6 of those conservative historical figures and give them a special treatment. Now these 6 span time, continents, cultures, and ethnicities. And who are the 6? In order of time, they are Confucius, Cato the Younger, Edmund Burke, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Margaret Thatcher, and Fuad Ajami. Now, these 6 are not the type that would normally be grouped together, and yet all 6 of them share 2 key pillars of conservative ideology. Number 1, they all believe strongly in personal responsibility. And number 2, they all shared a healthy skepticism for the fundamental power of government to do good. Now, we hope that you've enjoyed this list as much as we did compiling it. And here we go. The first of our conservative historical figures is Confucius. Confucius was a Chinese philosopher who lived in the 500s BC. Confucius would not normally be deemed a denizen of modern conservative philosophies until one reads his writings, until one better understands his philosophies. Let's start off with his thoughts on personal responsibility. And I quote, "The simple, the enduring, the firm, and the modest, these are closest to virtue." So think about that. These are closest to virtue. We live in an age in which the loudest voice or the most vulgar is the one that gets the attention. And when you read Confucius, you find it not only insightful, but frankly a little refreshing. And remember that word enduring. 2,500 years later, we are quoting Confucius. But Confucius was not just about personal responsibility. He also had a very healthy skepticism of government. So let me give you another quote. "Oppressive government is like a tiger." Now, tigers in 500s China were not the cuddly creatures we would see in the zoo today. They were man-eaters and something to be feared. It is interesting that in the late 20th century, the communist regime in China tried to stamp out Confucianism, tried to obliterate it, and yet here in 2017 we're quoting him. I find that very impressive, and frankly, that gives me hope. Second conservative historical figure, I wanted to talk about Cato the Younger. Now, Cato the Younger was a contemporary of Julius Caesar. And Julius Caesar is a very famous individual. He was an accomplished writer, lawyer, politician, and of course, general. Julius Caesar also oversaw the fundamental destruction of the Roman Republic and set up one-person rule. And at every point in Julius Caesar's career, he was opposed by Cato the Younger, who had a fundamental belief in liberty and a hatred of tyranny. How much of a hatred of that? Let's give us a Cato quote. "Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must first begin with the suppression of freedom of speech." Think about that today, the suppression of freedom of speech. There are institutions around the United States, particularly in the Academy, and also even the IRS, who have been noted to allow certain speech that they liked, but to suppress certain speech that they didn't. And perhaps not coincidentally, some of that speech that they have suppressed is conservative ideology. Remember that whenever you have that suppression of certain kinds of speech, you can lead to the loss of liberty. Now, freedom of speech is very important, and not just for speech that we agree with. It's far more important for that speech that we do not agree with. And at the Conservative Historian, we have never advocated the suppression of liberal speech. We just want freedom of speech for all ideologies and all ideas, just like Cato the Younger. Our next conservative historical figure is Edmund Burke. Now, Edmund Burke is widely considered to be the father of conservative ideology, the father of modern conservative thought. Now, he had a unique vantage point living in the late 1700s in Britain, in that he was able to have a front row seat for both the American Revolution and later the French Revolution. From these experiences, he learned a great deal. I'd like to share one of those thoughts from Edmund Burke today. And I quote, "The real danger is when liberty is nibbled away, either for expedience or by parts." So let's think about what Edmund Burke is trying to teach us. When liberty is nibbled away. So what Edmund Burke is not talking about is a fundamental revolution in which a single person, let's say, imposes a tyrannical regime over a country. Rather, liberty is not swept away in one massive stroke, but rather is gradually eroded. In the United States today, we are seeing some of that erosion, whether it be suppression of freedom of speech at the academy, whether it be further governmental interference within our lives, and on and on and on. So as we think about the laws being enacted, whether it be at the federal, the state, or the local government, it is important that we be vigilant and do not let our fundamental liberties be taken away from us piece by piece or part by part. Our next conservative historical figure is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now you might be watching this and thinking, wait a minute, conservative historical figure, Dr. King. And yet, when you look at the ideology and the writings of Dr. King, you see two key areas of conservative ideology. The first one is that Dr. King was an integrationist. We strongly believe that he would have rejected the identity politics that are so pervasive today. And let's think about one of his most famous quotes, "Judge me not by the color of my skin, but rather by the content of my character." That sounds to us like a clear rejection of identity politics. Let's talk about a second area, personal responsibility. When Dr. King observed crime statistics in the city of St. Louis, he noted that 58% of the crimes were being committed by 10% of the population, the African American population. And Dr. King said, and I quote, "We have to face that. We have to face that." What we believe that is an acceptance of some personal responsibility for those crime statistics. Now, this is not to say that within the civil rights movement that there were not outside forces causing oppression to African American people. That is not at all what we're saying. What we are saying, though, is that Dr. King believed that the African American population had a piece of their success, that part of their eventual success was reliant upon their own choices. We have to face that. Now, this isn't just a civil rights issue. We have several problems throughout our nation today. The best way to first address them is to ask, what is our own personal responsibility for those? The question we ask is, what do we have to face? Our next conservative historical figure is Margaret Thatcher. Now, out of all of the historical figures that we have featured, both on the Conservative Historian website and within this video series, none has been the subject of more revisionist history than Margaret Thatcher. But let's look at the facts. In 1979, when she assumed the prime ministership of the United Kingdom, Britain was in a malaise. When she left office, the nation was stronger, economically, politically, and I would even argue spiritually. She left the nation much stronger after her term of office. And that all those revisionist historians cannot change, nor, for that matter, can Hollywood. Let's consider one of her critical quotes, though, as we think about her impact upon history and the things that we can learn about her today. And that quote is this: "The problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money." Today, the developed world has a serious financial issue. There are unfunded pension liabilities and commitments, whether they be Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, or any other health services throughout the globe. All of this simply cannot be funded. We have run out of other people's money. And unless there is not serious reform to these fundamental institutions, showing that type of strong, courageous political leadership that Margaret Thatcher exhibited, well then, we are going to be in serious harm. Our final conservative historical figure is Fuad Ajami. Now, when we think about the other members on the list of this video series, they should be fairly commonplace names. Fuad Ajami, not so much, but he should be. His writings, his teachings, his opinion pieces should be fundamental subject matter for the conservative historian. Fuad Ajami was from Lebanon, of Muslim Shiite parents, emigrated to America and became what many believed a true American, a true success story within the United States. He also had very distinct opinions garnered from his learnings from the Middle East about how American presidents should conduct themselves. He rejected the concept of that populist, uber-charismatic president, and in regards to that, rejected the presidency of Barack Obama, noting the difference between Obama's personal charisma and the failures of his policies. He said, and I quote, "The spell has been broken. The magician has been exposed." What he was trying to tell us was all the charisma in the world does not get fundamental transformation of the United States in a negative way, that populism is not the fundamental way to governance. And then he contrasted that with the Reagan presidency. A presidency, interestingly enough, Barack Obama often compared his to that of Reagan. Of the Reagan presidency, Ajami noted, the Reagan presidency was always about America. It was not about Ronald Reagan. Reagan was neither a scold nor a narcissist, but had an unlimited belief in the capacity of renewal of the American people. Think about that contrast. In one case, you have a populist president who believed fundamentally in himself, not necessarily in the American people. In the other, you had a president who believed, and I just love that statement, a capacity for renewal of the American people. Ajami understood that key distinction, and that's why we need to understand all of the writings of Fuad Ajami.